Welcome back to our West Point Thoroughbreds podcast series. I'm Joe Bianca, and I'm joined, as always, by the Executive Vice President of West Point. Are you Executive Vice President, Tom? Is that your right title?
This week.
Okay. All right. Otherwise known as my Obi-Wan Kenobi here at West Point. So welcome, Tom. And we just wanted to jump on real quick and have a discussion about one of the races we have on Saturday, where we have two horses entered in the same race, two very popular West Point horses, QF 75 and Dripping Gold, from two different trainers. QF 75 trained by Christophe Clement, Dripping Gold with Shug McGahee. And it's an interesting scenario. It's something we don't do, I don't think, all that often at West Point, running two horses in the same race. And we wanted to focus, I think, mainly on QF 75 today. I think they're both training well, and that's kind of why we ended up in this spot. And there's several other reasons why we ended up in this same spot. But I wanted to address QF just because, Christophe has said over time that this is a horse that needs a lot of spacing between his races. I think he only raced 4 times last year. Ran 3.5 weeks ago. He was great. Tommy was there with a whole mess of partners, and they had a great time. So he's back on relatively short rest. Tommy, can you just take the partners in the discussions with Christophe and why they decided to somewhat call an audible and bring him back fairly soon?
Of course, Joe. And, when you get these, let's call them, for lack of a better phrase, surprise entries, right? That all of a sudden, Dripping Gold has been pointed for this spot. That was the spot circled in the book for him. QF 75, we had planned, and even with Christophe last week on Tuesdays at 2, talked about, hey, you just got to make sure with him that he's doing well and he's moving forward. And the horse came out of the race in phenomenal shape. He ran a great race. He's always been a horse they're super, super high on. So, for the most part, it is an exciting horse that we have high aspirations for. So here we are. It's a non-winners of 2 other than condition. And Christophe decides, you know what, I'm going to enter QF 75 on a little over 3 weeks in between races and go in that spot. And the reasoning behind that is fairly simple. It is a little complex, but it's fairly simple. The reason is he's doing great. And if we don't run in this race, we probably won't be able to run for about 6 weeks. The racing secretary has said this condition, this non-winners of 2 other than, comes back again in a few weeks, but it's at 12 furlongs. And that is not a distance at this point in Christophe's, in QF's career, that Christophe is comfortable sending him at. He said, you know what, that's the kind of thing that could stress a horse, especially with him, because he lays it on the line every time he runs. Not that eventually we couldn't get to that 12 furlong, but that's not a race right now, second start of the year, that he wants to point to. So if we skip that race, our options are to try to find something out of town or to run in this particular race coming up on Saturday. Now, the positives to the race on Saturday is, A, it's a turf course that he just has run phenomenal over, as well as in the past he's run phenomenal over that course. B, it's a walkover from his barn. He's stabled at Belmont Park. He walks over. He schools in the morning. He trains there every day. It should not be a stressor on him to walk him over for the race and such, like things like that. And the turf course is in pristine shape. So it's not like we're going to ship to Pimlico or some other racetrack in the Mid-Atlantic or in Canada, where you're rolling the dice a little on A, weather, and B, is the turf course chewed up a little bit, or especially with a horse that we know has struggled a little bit with staying sound in the long term with some bone bruising. So A, we're going to take away 6 weeks of kind of training hard up to that other race, and then B, he gets to walk over from his own stall.
Yeah, I think that's a point to emphasize too, is that it's a little counterintuitive that running him more frequently can, assuage some of the pounding that he would take training for so long. But can you talk a little bit about that, because it's going to take so long to get that race back, what he would go through the next 6 to 8 weeks while waiting for that race?
Yeah, I think what would happen is if you circle a race 6 weeks from now quite honestly, I think Christoph would have to let up a little on him and then try to gear him back up again. You know, when he's coming out of a race like this where he's really fit and he's run great, you don't have to do a lot with him. He has worked back and he worked great. Now, you know, he can run in this race, and then as he points towards whatever there, you don't need to press as hard on these horses. He's going to have 2 races under his belt. His fitness will be at, you know, getting closer to peak level. And when you talk about, you know, 6 weeks from now, that's a regular breeze schedule. That's going to be 4 or 5 more breezes before the next race. And quite honestly, he doesn't need it. He's race fit. He's doing great. And after this race, he'll have 2 races under his belt, where then you can almost even at times, especially with some of our you know, our grass horses, you'll just jog and light gallop them for a few weeks. You won't have to have that weekly pounding of a breeze schedule.
Right. Well, I'm going back to the point you made that I think is key about the options for him in the book, because you were saying on our horse call yesterday, it's not like a maiden race where they kill the race and they'll bring it back probably in the next week or so because they have so many maidens on the grounds. Can you talk a little bit about his conditions, what he's eligible for, and why they don't necessarily bring those races back, like you're saying, for maybe another 6 weeks?
Yeah. In general, the more a horse wins, the less options he has. Okay. I mean, let's just keep that as the baseline. Okay. This horse has won a maiden special and a non-winners of 1, other than allowance. So going forward, the next condition that he's eligible for would be a non-winners of 2 other than, which is the race we're entering, just like Dripping Gold, a stake race, which quite honestly, we're not sure he's ready for yet. Not something that you'd want to dive into a stake right off of the, you know, the first race off a long, second race off a long layoff. You know, when you have a condition to give him more experience. And third is a claiming race. Those are basically the 3 options that, as horses improve, you know, the horse that comes to mind when we have this discussion is Voodoo Zip. Voodoo Zip has won. He's what's called the non-winners of 4 other than. He's won 4 times in his career. He won a maiden race, non-winners of 1, non-winners of 2, non-winners of 3. He stakes place. His options are either some type of non-winners of 3 with a date, meaning he hasn't won in X amount of time, a stake race, which we're not sure right now at 6 years old that he's that caliber, or a high claiming race. So when we get to look at QF 75, these are his options. He's a non-winners of 2. Other than that, you're going to be looking at either a stake race or a claiming race, which right now aren't at all appealing to us.
Yeah, he's kind of in that middle spot right now. Right. Where he needs the right race. You know, it's an interesting point about the horse population too, and the fact that they can't write these races all that frequently. As you can see, if you look at the entries, you look at the PPs for tomorrow's race, there's only 6 horses in the race. We're obviously coupled entry with QF 75 and Dripping Gold. Some people, I think, would jump to the conclusion that, you know, we entered the horse maybe just to make the race go, but that's not the case. And so, Tommy, can you explain why that isn't the case?
Yeah, when you look at it, you'd think Christoph just entered QF 75, so there'd be 6 races, 6 horses, so they would use the race, whether it be for Dripping Gold or for Christoph's other horse that's in the race. The truth of the matter is, when you enter a horse as an entry, parimutually as an entry, it absolutely has no effect on whether the race goes or not, because what decides the race is betting entries. Whether they have 5 or 6 betting entries will be what decides if the race goes, not whether how many horses. So let's say, just for instance, I believe Chad Brown has a Klarovich horse in the race. Let's say Chad Brown entered another Klarovich horse and we entered as well. It wouldn't impact the race going because there still would only be 5 parimutuel entries. If Christoph hadn't entered his other horse, who was cross-entered at Monmouth, in this race, the race wouldn't have gone.
Right, exactly. So us having 2 horses in the race doesn't affect whether or not the race goes, because they're both the same betting interest. Speaking of betting, Tommy, I know you like to bet a little bit. How do we look? How do we see this race? You know, in terms of QF 75, we think he'll be on the lead. Dripping Gold is pretty handy as well. How do you see the race playing out? They're going a mile and an eighth. So there's that short run to that first turn. The race is at 1:30, by the way, if you're going to be out there. I hope to see you out there. But Tommy, how do you think this race plays out from a handicapper's perspective?
Yeah, I think, it's one of those with a short field. I'd be stunned if QF isn't on the lead. Dripping Gold, I've been wrong about him before. When we ran down at Gulfstream and he had a rough post, I anticipated he would be up closer to the lead in that race, and he didn't. He took back, and maybe that was because of the post down there and a difficult trip. And then he comes back at Keeneland, and he runs. It was Keeneland, right?
Dripping Gold ran at Keeneland.
Yep. When he won at Keeneland, he was further forward. But in this race, I would think he would be no worse than like third. I would anticipate, because of the small field, if he's not, sitting a length off of QF 75, I would think he wouldn't be much further than 2 lengths off the lead in any part, just because of the small field, and you wouldn't want to lose touch with the leader.
Yeah. I mean, a small field might not be attractive from a betting standpoint. From our standpoint, getting the horses clean trips, getting them in the clear, I think it makes the job a lot easier. And I know you're rooting for this, and I'm rooting for this as well. We hope they either dead heat or run 1-2 tomorrow. So we're looking forward to getting them both back. And I think, the thing to remember from this is that it's a sweet spot for both horses. 9 furlongs, this kind of race might not come back for a little bit. And we think very, very highly of them both. So best of luck to all the partners. Hope to see you out there. Tommy, thanks for jumping on real quick and explaining this to us.
My pleasure, Joe. Have a great holiday weekend, everybody.
Awesome.